Welcome to Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing, one of the fastest growing real estate investing podcasts in the world. What if you could learn from experienced real estate investors? Find out what got them to where they are now. Get insight into their daily habits and take these insights to inspire your own growth. Each episode, Jonathan Greene shares an in-depth look at the mindful approach to real estate investing. Jonathan is a lifelong real estate investor and the founder of Streamline, a data-driven, investor-friendly, independent real estate brokerage located in Madison, New Jersey. Whether you're looking to start from scratch, get to the next level, or just for a straightforward and honest approach to real estate investing, this is the free mentorship program you can take with you anywhere. Now, here's Jonathan.
Thanks for showing up for another episode of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. And it's a milestone show, episode 350. And it's a solo show, The Mindful Approach to Landlording, which is a subset of the overall theme of this podcast, the mindful approach to real estate investing. I'm going to talk to you about my experience, both as a landlord and as someone who works with tons of landlords as a real estate investor and agent. And this is a show that's going to help you become a better landlord and treat everyone in there with respect, because that is what is best for your property. Let's go. This is episode 350 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. And we are going solo show, the mindful approach to landlording. I'm not going to keep talking about the solo shows. This is just the way it is now. We're going to be doing a lot. We're going to be hustling guests, but we're getting into what is a subset of really what the podcast is, the mindful approach to real estate investing. And now we're going to talk about the mindful approach to landlording. Now, last episode, you got those 10 tips from my dad. Before that, you got the 10 best books on real estate investing that I've read, in my opinion. Now you're going to get a mindful approach on how to be a landlord. And these are things that I think can really help you along the way. Most real estate investors at some point become a landlord. Sometimes in the beginning, most of the times in the beginning. If you're a house hacker, you're still a landlord. There's so many things that come up that you need to be aware of in terms of landlording. And we just did a house hacking show as well. So that's part of it as well. So the mindful approach to landlording is something, again, I've learned some of these things from my dad. I learned a lot from myself because I was helping being a landlord as a teenager. I was collecting rent, figuring out how to get the rents up to date. So I had a lot of tenant contact in both commercial and residential properties that my dad owned. And I was doing walkthroughs from, 4 or 5 years old on, learning the tenants' names, understanding what their businesses were, and just kind of knowing what the residential activity was in the area. I don't remember back then how he rented them, but I think he put ads in the Penny Saver. We were in Westchester, and I think he just screened the tenants himself, but I really don't remember because I was just a kid. And then as I was taking over, I don't remember releasing anything because he let people stay for a long time. And obviously that meant the tenants liked him. And that's all part of the mindful approach to landlording. How do you find the balance between landlord, tenant, friend, and somebody who needs to enforce things when it comes time? Of course, you want to avoid having to ever enforce something, but that usually means you might have missed something on the way in. So choosing tenants is going to be a big, very important step. It's probably the step where I think people make the most mistakes as a landlord. And it can haunt you for a long time if you can't get a tenant out, or you get a bad tenant, or you've created a situation that's untenable for another tenant. And that's what you have to remember. More units, more potential conflict. So single family homes, which is what I was mostly the landlord of growing up, a little bit easier. They're really not dealing with anybody, that they're sharing a wall with. You can't have disputes. You just have general fix-its and complaints about the property. And you have to remember what you're responsible for as a landlord. That's going to be exterior. We're going to get to that. Exterior that looks nice creates good interior. So I just scribbled down a list of things that came to mind when I was prepping for this episode. And the overriding theme that I want you to remember is something that I've repeated multiple times. Tenants are the caretakers of your investment property. If you look at it differently, you're not paying attention to what the overall potential of the property is. In order to reach its peak potential, you have to have good upkeep, good systems, good location, of course, but you also need good tenants. Good tenants keep the upkeep of the inside, so it reduces your turnover costs. They also don't leave, so it keeps you steady, not having to do turnarounds at all. And again, that's going to really go back to how you choose, which we're going to talk about. But you have to, when you're readjusting your mindset of being a landlord, and you don't want to be what the national news calls everybody a slumlord, which of course is not true. You have to adjust the mindset to think of them as caretakers. And if you want someone to take good care of one of the biggest investments that you've ever made in your life, you actually have to be nice to them, and you have to treat them with respect, and you have to treat this relationship as a partnership. You are the owner, you are the landlord, they are the tenant. There is a power dynamic there. But in order to create the best environment for the property, which also leads to the highest rents long term, you need to treat the tenants with respect. Even when maybe they have something going on, you always have to be the bigger person. You have to understand that things happen. You have to understand that people who move in to a one bedroom, sometimes they get in relationships, and then someone might move in. That's not unreasonable to me. Might it be a little more wear and tear? Yes, but the place didn't get bigger. So it's not like there was an open bedroom and then they brought in a roommate. So these things happen. Of course, you're probably going to address that in your lease. But I want you to think of every tenant as a caretaker of your property, and think of it like an innkeeper or like the person who lives in the lighthouse. Their job is to take care of the property, but your job is to take care of the outside of the property and the common areas. And that's a very important dynamic that we're going to talk about, of what makes people happy. You may not think of it as home because it's an investment property for you, but your tenants, it's their home. They may think of it as their home, and you want them to think of it as their home, because if they think of it as their home, they're going to go less rough on it, and they're going to treat it with the respect that deserves. Instead of thinking about a house that they're renting from a slumlord that they don't care about, they're not going to tell you about anything, and they're not going to care about the property. Maybe that's just the way that it goes. Bad landlording creates bad tenants. Sometimes bad tenants are created from themselves, and you have your professional tenants these days that know what they're doing. But those are things that you have to weed out in the beginning. So the first thing to always remember as the overriding theme of this episode is tenants are the caretakers of your investment property, and you should treat them as such. Choosing a tenant is really important. You've probably, if you've listened to podcasts for a long time, you've heard a lot of short-term rental shows. We have a guide for short-term rentals up on my Substack. And short-term rental shows, we're always talking about the avatar. Who's your avatar? Who's the person that you're building, or the group that you're building this investment property for? So it's a little bit different when you have a long-term rental, but you have to know your avatar. And your avatar for a long-term rental comes from, what's the dynamic in the area? Are you in an A, B, C, D, or something modified in the middle? What's your income base for that area? Have you researched the demographic trends that relate to income, and what is the annual salary for just your regular worker? Someone who probably just can't afford a home. Maybe they're too young, they're not ready for a home, or like a lot of people, they're going to be choice renters. So what is your tenant pool? And your tenant pool is where you'll come up with the avatar that you're looking for. I think about it a lot when I'm looking at long-term rentals for clients. I'm thinking like, who's moving to this area? And who's moving to this setup? If we have a 1-bed, 1-bath, or if we have a 3-bed, 1-bath, are you open to kids, or do you want to call that a 2-bedroom because one of the bedrooms is really small? Hopefully you get a couple who wants an office, or 2 offices. So you really can play it a lot of different ways. And you have occupancy things that could come up if people are trying to sneak in too many people. But you have to go through and understand the neighborhood that you've bought in, and understand what the tenant pool is going to look like. So you know that when you start, and I don't mean look like in person, I mean like overall, like what does that tenant package look like when they submit an application? You want to see and know in advance what you're getting. You're not going to know generally what credit scores. In a lot of areas, you can have wide variegated credit scores, from 550 to 785. But you're generally looking for I mean, I would love 700, but that's kind of crazy. You're really looking for 600 and up. But it depends on what kind of area you're in and what that tenant base is, what the pool's like, what your rent is like, versus the market rent, what your upkeep is. If you have a great upkeep, even in a lower rent market, you're still going to get the cream of the crop for that area. And that's just something that you have to do the research on. You have to know. You should be relying on your investor friendly agent for help. But again, in the end, it's not going to be their fault. You're always the one who chooses the tenant, unless you've hired out property management and you've given them the authority to choose a tenant. That's not what I would do. But you can do you. So knowing your avatar is really important. That's creating something from data that you can source online, kind of looking through what the other rentals went for, what their upkeep look like, and what those tenancies look like, how often they left. Not everything's not all rentals are listed on the MLS, and in some areas they're not at all. So you may not have the exact data, but you can use something like Rentometer, which I use. It gives you a quick overview on what the rents are going to look like in that area. So yeah, Rentometer, if you're listening, well, let's hook it up. Let's get a code here. But I really do. I use Rentometer a few times a week, just kind of plugging stuff in to see what those are going to look like. So you want to do your due diligence on the tenant. That means for me personally, I use RentSpree for my clients. It's just an easy platform that I go through. Don't have a relationship with them either. So what's up, RentSpree? But RentSpree is easy because what you get is you get a full PDF that you can just share the inside of the system with your owner, the landlord. I find it much easier. The clients can also upload all their docs into one thing so that if you're managing both ends of a rental transaction as an agent, which I am a lot of the time, I could easily print it into one PDF. I hate when I get a rental application and it has like 42 attachments of all the bank accounts and they send me, 16 pages when I just want the cover page. And I really don't care how many times they went to Aldi that month. It doesn't make any difference to me. But you have to have a system, whether it's RentSpree or whether you use Turbo Tenant or you use some other of these vetting mechanisms. They're all important. You want to make sure that you're going through it, checking for past evictions, checking for the things that are out there. Obviously, you're going to get their credit score. And personally, I don't give anyone a credit score minimum, and I don't advise landlords to do that either. It's very dicey to say that you have a minimum. So I just say we take a whole package together. Sometimes people say, oh, I have a past eviction, can I apply? And I don't discourage anyone from not applying, but the application is the RentSpree, which is like $49, I think. So, if they're not going to fill that out, that's not going to be a win for my landlord clients either. So doing your due diligence is making sure the docs are correct. And if you're a landlord, you should be calling direct to verify their job. RentSpree allows the person to verify the employment, but you don't know if they gave the right email address. So you should always call direct. And I can tell you a story now, break the story now. I was renting for clients in, I think, Hoboken. We got an application that looked pretty decent. But he was coming from out of the country and had a letter that was on what looked to be HR letterhead verifying his employment. Also had a visa, which PS turned out to be fake. So you can create a lot on the internet. We called the HR, not by calling the number on the document that he gave me, because that was the cell phone of a friend. We looked up the company online. We called direct to the HR company, kind of something similar that you do with wire information. You don't take it off the page. You look it up online, then you call the real number. And they had never heard of the person. So we flagged that. I think we actually sent that to the police. Don't know what happened, but you have to do more due diligence than just trusting every system. Because again, you're putting a caretaker of your investment property in there. You want to make sure that you touch all the bases, and doing that employment verification check is very, very important, because if they don't have a job, you're not getting paid. So you want to make sure that job is real. Sometimes you can go on the website and then you see them on the website and you're like, oh, okay, I'd still call to verify. They could have got fired. Obviously, you'll also get the pay stubs. Pay stubs are big, but again, you still want to trust and verify everything because people can create anything on the internet with AI now. You could literally say, create an entire package of rental docs for me, and it would probably be done by one of these AI bots in a few seconds. Hey, it's Jonathan. I hope you're enjoying this micro episode about the mindful approach to landlording. And as we're at episode 350, I just want to say thanks for listening. Whether you're new or an old school OG original listener, I appreciate it. I never imagined that I'd get to episode 350. I know not many podcasters do, but I'm excited that I made it, and I'm excited about where the podcast is going. We've done a lot of solo shows recently, but we got a lot of cool stuff coming, and I'm really appreciative that you're here. Let's get back to the show. So if you listen to the advice from my dad's show, which came out the day that I'm recording this, but I think the episode before this was a house hacking show, let everyone have their story, meaning, tenants, if they're struggling on a payment, if someone lost a job, what are you supposed to say to that? This came up a lot when I was younger. Someone will lose a job. Younger me was like, oh, well, who cares? Just kick them out. That's not reasonable. You got to give them a chance to try to get another job. If a lot of people get downsized these days. You have to be open to it. Hopefully they're working hard to do it. If, you find out they're just sitting around and doing nothing, sure, that's something else to consider. But I allow them to tell their story. Whether I believe it or not is another thing. That's another trust and verify, about jobs and employment and the money coming in. So that's something to think about. And just on a side note, something that I mentioned before, I don't like when landlords are complaining in forums about people getting into relationship and now the person's staying over there. Single people get into relationships. This is what happened. And then they spend more time together. Someone's over there more. They sleep over more. Sometimes it's helpful to have somebody else there. A second party can fix things. There's more eyes on the unit. So I wouldn't always think of the negative on that. Of course, if it's a bad partner and it's creating hostile environment or other problems and complaints, sure, that's another story. But I don't punish people for getting into a relationship. Probably, hopefully, will make them happier and less lonely. And we're having a loneliness epidemic, and it doesn't really put that much more wear and tear on there. You got to check the parking, make sure that's all worked out. If they're there for a long time, obviously you're going to want to get them on the lease. It's really up to how much you're there and whether they know it's okay for them to disclose that, so you can have the discussion at that time. I talked about curb appeal before. In my opinion, a lot of landlords just don't think it's important. They don't make the exterior look nice. Maybe they don't get the house power washed as much if you're talking about a multifamily or an apartment building. So the exterior I've seen of a lot of rental units look shabby. And then when you go inside, sometimes there's going to be more broken stuff. You have to think of it from the tenant's point of view. If the landlord won't plant anything outside, doesn't fix the doorbell, which is falling off, has a cracked window, has dirt all over the outside, doesn't clean the gutters, allows moss to accrue on the roof, why are they going to call you when they have they had a little fire? They're probably not. And things are going to get worse and worse. If you have a little water issue, then that trickle, you're like, well, they didn't respond on time last time, so I'm not going to call them. Now you have a mold issue. So when you pay attention to the exterior and you make them know that this is a property that you care about and you care about them coming home and feeling good and the exterior looking good, that creates a better landlord-tenant relationship because you're invested in your investment property looking good, which makes them feel good. So every time when they come home, they don't start feeling down, they feel up. Wow. Landlord's paying attention to things. I feel great. I'm going to make sure that I'm keeping it clean in there. Or I'm going to let them know when we have, the ants show up in the summer. These are things about how you're building a relationship with the tenant. You obviously don't have to be best friends, but the way you build a trust relationship is by responding quickly to the things that they ask, even if they're crazy, which does happen. And you make sure that you are doing the upkeep on the building. Obviously, snow removal, if you're in a snow area, is super important to make sure for safety and obviously insurance. You got to clear that within 24 hours of the last snowfall, hopefully earlier than that. Landscaping, you want landscaping to be done. It's nice to put in some planting. It's nice to allow them some backyard space if they have it. You got to make sure that that is cleaned and mowed as well. So also there's common area upkeep. Sometimes in a 2-family or an apartment building, just like a small one where there's no amenities and you have like a mailbox area, or there's a common area in a 2-family where both people walk in and there's a door downstairs and a door upstairs. That's your responsibility as a landlord. You have to keep that clean. You have to make it nice. You could create a spot for packages. You could create a spot where they could put stuff if they need to. And for shared information between the two parties, you should have a little bulletin board or some system in there that they can see something which has the house rules, which I do think you should have house rules available, which are not overreaching, but just kind of guides for when everything should be done, which I'm going to get to next. So common area and exterior upkeep, I believe, are very, very important for building trust with your tenant and making them appreciate the interior as much as you appreciate the exterior. I briefly just talked about a set of house rules. I wouldn't go crazy on that, but I do think it's important to have house rules. And the things that I'm most concerned about are, number one, parking. If you have parking, I think the most important thing is to mark them so everybody knows where they're going to park. Obviously, if you have a single wide driveway, you're going to have to help them coordinate who gets out by checking their work schedules to try to help them ease the tension from if someone's in front of someone. If you have a slot out set of spaces, you should be painting those on there, unit 1, unit 2, so everybody knows where to park and there's no disputes when guests come over. If nothing's marked, there's really nothing to dispute. You really want to make it as easy for them. When you make it easy for the tenants to have no wonder of what to do, you make it less likely you're going to get a call and you're less likely you're going to get a dispute between those tenants. So that's parking. Laundry is another thing I advocate. If you have a 2-family or if you have less laundry per unit, like say you have a 2-family, 1 laundry set, or you have a 4-family, you only have 2 laundry set. If you have less, you need to create days for your tenants. You just tell them Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and then Sunday is an off day, or a free for all if you want. But again, if you have set laundry days for each unit, it reduces the tenant the potential issues between them. Could someone get a stain and need to use the laundry? Yeah, I mean, they could probably wash it in the sink until the next day. If you have them operating every other day, barring something, they should be able to plan for that. So I like having rules for laundry, rules for parking. You want to make those things easy. Personally, I think throwing Wi-Fi in is pretty easy because then you have less people coming and deciding, oh, they want to put a dish, they want to get Wi-Fi through a dish. You just have the Verizon there. You throw it in, you can add it onto the rent. I find it to be easier. They can both create their own networks off of that if they want. I just think it's something easy to do. And the house rules applies to backyards as well. So if you have access for multiple parties to the backyard, you have to kind of do your best to set up. You can't really set up a schedule like that, but I would send them a holiday schedule. Like if you're having 4th of July, you want to give them both the opportunity to use the yard if you can, slot them at different times. You do need to assist them. You can't assume that all tenants are going to handle this on their own. And when they don't agree, you're going to get the call or the police are going to get a call when they really don't agree. So making sure that you're there to kind of be a buffer to just make things easier for these type of things. If they have kids, checking when their kid's birthday, are they planning on using the backyard for the birthday, letting the other tenant know, hey, they're going to have a birthday, make sure you understand, not use the yard on that day. You hope that they can handle that stuff themselves. But again, I think you're going to save yourself time and money over the long term and better relationships by just being a little bit helpful in that, understanding the backyard. When you can split the backyard in a 2-family, I always advocate putting a small fence up just so people each know they have their own space, no matter how small it is, so they can work within that space and the other people understand which space is theirs. Kind of familiar to what I said in my 10 lessons from my dad. You have to be firm but available and understanding. So available means you can't make people wait. You have to have a 24/7 system if you don't have a property manager. There has to be a way, if there's gushing water in the house or there's been a fire, that they know they have a BAT number to call that will go through 24/7. You do run the risk that they abuse that if they have some special number. So you have to have a system in place that allows for emergency calls 24/7 because you're trying to protect your property. And look, landlording can be a 24/7 business. The joke is always that you're always unclogging toilets on Thanksgiving and Christmas, not ever on the day where you just have nothing else to do and you got home early and your family's out at the mall and you got time to kill. Although that would be terrible because that's some of your free time. But this is just how it goes with being a landlord. One thing that I think is really important overall that a lot of people confuse and ask questions about, especially when they're house hacking or where they're getting their first thing, is I want to tell you, don't hide from your tenants as a landlord. You're not going to hide behind an LLC unless you're paying cash. And if you were, they can just look up who the members of the LLC are. It's not easy to find, but it's not hard to find out who that is. You have to be a present landlord. And even if you have property management, they should know who you are because you want them to be accountable to you. You want them to know that when you come down, it's going to be a problem, if they've done something to the property. These are things that you have to enforce. Again, it goes to being firm but available and understanding. But you can't hide from your tenants. You don't want to hide behind corporations or hide behind, I don't want them to know that I'm living next door if you're house hacking. You're the landlord. You just have that. You can't get away from it. If you don't want to be known as the landlord, you probably shouldn't get into the business. Because even if you hire property management, like I said, they know that they're just a conduit to you. And if you're just some mysterious person in the wind, from 123 Main Street, that does not develop a genuine relationship. It really doesn't. So these are things that you have to think about when you're going through all of landlording. I think that the mindful approach just involves being like a person, treating people with respect, understanding that they have their own things, especially on the rental process. When I put up my clients' rental listings, which is a lot of them, that represent a lot of landlords, we treat all incoming rental applications with the same respect, as I said before. No matter what they say the credit of 300. I say that's definitely going to be tough, but we look at all of the applications as a whole. So I can't tell you who's going to get accepted or not, but if you put in an application, they will all go to the landlord. We will review them together and we will let you know. And I train my landlords to not jump at the first offer. Sometimes it is a good offer, someone who really needs a place and they're well qualified. Yeah, you're going to snap that up. But some people see a very so-so application right away and they're like, oh, cool, I'll only, lose a few days. That's if you're not like, yeah, this is going to be a great tenant, don't take it. I've had clients wait 30, 60, 90 days. Occasionally, like randomly, one will just sit for 120 days for no reason, but they end up with a better tenant and then it's a solid tenancy. Can it get a little dicey in there when you're paying, you're not getting that income? Yeah, that's part of being a landlord. The second that you make a decision based on immediacy for a tenant, you're going to make a mistake. And that mistake could mean not paying rent for a year, squatting, doing anything like that. Choosing your tenant is the absolute linchpin of the property, in addition to just you being a steward for your upkeep and maintenance of the property. You have to have everything maintained. You have to know going in what stuff's going to come due, when you need a new roof, when you're going to need a new furnace, if everything's separated, how you're going to bill them, what they need to sign up for themselves. These things need to be super clear. It goes in the manual, gives them all the information they need. It gives them that BAT phone number. It just gives them a way to know that you're accountable and you're there to help. And again, even if property management is involved, I wouldn't just check out on that completely. I still think that you need to have a relationship. Because honestly, if your property manager is bad and you are more uncomfortable talking to the property manager, but the tenants know you, they'll probably tell you. So to me, like, you just want to be a regular person building relationships. It's what real estate investing is all about. And if you're scared of talking to tenants, you should not be a landlord. And you shouldn't rely on your property manager to be your proxy in that way if you can't have uncomfortable conversations. Because you won't know what your property manager is doing. They may not treat the tenants the way that you would treat the tenants. So if you go back to the episode, actually it was the episode right before this was with Jen Rulin's episode number 2, and that's how to hire and fire your property manager. So when you look at shows like that, that's going to give you other tips when you're hiring out for management. And that was episode 349, one before this. I know I said a lot of shows were right before this, but they were all within the last 4. So I hope you understand that the podcast is really morphing. We're really trying to find this mindful end of real estate investing, but still talk to investors who all have a background and their own properties. And it's still, in my opinion, the show is built for everybody. It could be long-term investors. For me, sometimes someone who's been in the game like myself for so long, I get a lot out of listening to kind of what would be considered more of a newbie show, because I never know when I'm going to want to get back into something besides regular landlording. Just not for me. I'm just not generally not good at it. I was actually better at it when I was a kid than I would be now. My patience level is just low. So this is the mindful approach to landlording. It's a better way to create better relationships within your property, which creates higher end caretakers for your property. Remember, your one overriding theme of the mindful approach to landlording is tenants are the caretakers of your investment property. Hope this has been helpful, and I hope you swing by for episode 351 next time. Take care. Thanks for sticking around to the end so you can get a preview of what's coming up on episode 351 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. And I crack on wholesalers all the time, so I'm coming in with the ethical way to wholesale real estate. It's only really one way, and I'm going to give you my opinion on how it can be done ethically. Depending if you have a license or not, you really shouldn't have a license because it conflicts with your license. But I think if you're going to create a wholesaling business, there's really only one way to do it. I'm going to tell you how next episode.